Welcome back to Crisis What Crisis, the podcast that aims to guide you towards a more resilient life and whatever it might throw at you. If this is your first time with us, then do please hit subscribe wherever you're watching or listening, and please do leave us a review. It really helps make sure that these, I hope, useful conversations are shared as widely as possible. Today's guest is a best-selling, award-winning author and advocate for the marginalised and unheard voices in literature. We talk a lot on this podcast about how to find opportunity from crisis. This conversation will explore how Kit de Waal did just that by discovering and then putting to work a creativity that was hidden, that was buried really for decades.
Fear was my main motivator to getting a life, getting myself together. And of course it stopped being a motivator after I'd got a handle on my life. But it was definitely fear that stopped me. I wouldn't say misbehaving, it wasn't misbehaving, it was an answer to the fear of dying.
After working on the front line of social services, Kit turned her own challenges into a powerful new career as an author in her 40s, with novels including My Name is Leon, which was adapted into a brilliant TV drama, The Trick to Time, her childhood memoir Without Warning and Only Sometimes, and her new novel, The Best of Everything.
Mid-40s to mid-50s, when I did have a bestseller, that was a period of get real, do the work, learn the craft, fail again, fail better, pick yourself up and keep going.
She has emerged not just as a writer of profound and moving stories, but also as a tireless campaigner for inclusion and an inspiration to millions of would-be writers. Kit de Waal, welcome to Crisis What Crisis.
Hello, great to be here.
You are a brilliant woman of words. So can I start by asking about one that we use a lot on this podcast, but which I think you have strong views on?
Yes.
The word is resilient.
Oh, yes.
I think it's fair to say you are not a fan.
I'm not a fan.
Can you explain why?
I can, yes. So I used to work in social services where you would have children that had come into the care system particularly, and also adults who had come to the attention of social services or the criminal justice system. But talking about children in particular, children would come into the care system, all sorts of damage, sometimes minor, sometimes major, and sometimes they'd been in care for years. And I would hear social workers say things all the time like, oh, children are resilient. Children are resilient. And really, for me, that was a code word for they've got no choice. They're resilient because they have no choice. They have to get on with it. They can't say, oh, actually, I think I'll move foster placement, or I think I'll go back to my mum. They were utterly powerless. And so their resilience wasn't born out of, here are these tools I have to get through this terrible time, but it was, I am totally disempowered, so I'm just going to have to get on with it. And that kind of resilience actually builds, certainly in children, vulnerable children, unhealthy ways of being resilient. Oh, what I'll do now is I'll shut down. Or what I'll do now is I'll smear poo on the walls. Or what I'll do now is I'll steal. So, of course, they look resilient. And looking resilient is one thing, and being resilient is another thing. Because I think you can only be resilient when you have tools, when you have mechanisms, when you can say to yourself as an adult, oh, this thing is happening. What am I going to do to feel better? Or what am I going to do to cope? Children haven't got access to that stuff at all. They've just got, oh, this is happening to me. I'm going to shut up about it or go deep inside and bury those things that often come out in adulthood in lots of unhealthy ways, which is why you have children in the care system overrepresented in mental health services, overrepresented in prisons, overrepresented in lots of unhealthy places, as well as healthy places like the armed forces, because they know how to shut up and do as they're told. And so you'll have lots of men and women going into the armed forces because that's their coping mechanism.
Yes.
Powerlessness,
yes.
Or at least being constrained by rules and regulations.
So if we think then that resilience somehow, distracts or minimises trauma,
yes,
how else then do we characterise what is is, a very valuable part of the human condition, if you like, the ability to withstand.
So in children, I think it's different. And if we park children for a moment, because I think children, certainly that are going through some kind of trauma, need adult help and adult attention. But if we ignore children for a moment, I think the way that we cope with resilience, cope with trauma or build resilience is first you have to recognise something bad is happening to you. You have to go, oh, this isn't right. I don't feel good. You have to sort of say, right, now I need this medicine. For example, oh, I've got a cold, I need this medicine. I've got that wrong, I broke my leg, I need this to happen. And I think what happens so often when we are in need of resilience is we've gone so far down the line. By the time we're trying to cope with our crisis, it's become a crisis where there were probably 5 steps before we could have caught it, we could have deviated, we could have sought help. So I think for me, the way that we build resilience, certainly recognise it and then find out what works for you. And normally get some help.
Very good. I'm going to do my best to avoid the R word then as we move forward. I will fail, I suspect. In fact, I know I'm going to.
We will use it as a word because it is true that you need to have resilience. You hear this phrase. It's a phrase I hate, but I'll use it anyway, snowflake.
Yes.
And it's talking about people who are very sensitive. And of course, maybe there are some people who are oversensitive. And we cannot walk through this world crisis-free. Nobody. I don't believe anybody. There's no money in the world that will inure you against crisis. So you do have to have resilience and you do have to find a way to say, this bad thing's happening, I'm going to find a way through it. So you do have to have resilience.
Your name, Kit, is in many ways a sort of emblem of resilience, because your real name is Mandy.
Yes.
But that all changed one day when you were, I think, 8 years old.
Yes.
So tell us what happened.
I was standing on... So this would have been 1968 or 66, can't remember. I was standing on a little wooden table that had casters on it, and I was singing I Can't Get No Satisfaction, possibly one of the best songs of all time.
Yes,
and I was being Mick Jagger on this very shiny table with casters, and inevitably it went over and I hit my mouth on one of the legs. And as a result of that accident, I bit my tongue almost clean off. I mean, it was hanging on by a little thread. Had to go rush to hospital, and I had to have it sewn back on. I do remember that. That was quite traumatic. Lots of light and pain, obviously. And also a surgeon trying to get his entire hand into my mouth. And I went home and I had a lisp. And I had a lisp for a long, long time. One of the words I couldn't say was kiss. And I said to my little baby sister, I said, give me a Kit. And I got called Kit, as is the way in big families where if there's something wrong with you, we're going to pinpoint it and we're going to call you. That's resilient. And I just got called Kit I got called Kit until the lisp disappeared. But even now, certain members of my family will just call me Kit. Some will call me Mandy, obviously.
So the decision to use that as your professional name, if you like, as your name as an author.
That was because Mandy's possibly the worst name in the world, up there with... I mean, my mother, she was a woman of the 60s. She she was 20 in the 60s. And she liked the names of the time, the sort of Jordan of the time. And Mandy, Tracy, Kim, Dean and Karen, they were her children. What's the most common name? Oh, there it is. So I grew up, like I say, in the 70s when I just got called Randy Mandy all the time because that was... the terrible 70s when that's what the boys at school called me. And I've always disliked my name. And
you're a Mandy, not an Amanda?
I'm a Mandy, I'm not. She didn't even give me the dignity of an Amanda.
My sister had the opt-out to Amanda.
Yes.
She was a Mandy and hated
it. Because Amanda, I know
absolutely
a couple of Amandas,
and
it's not bad, but Mandy, it's awful. And
it's a short step from Andy, by the way, so we might want to move on here. Mandy, Kit... I think you had the intriguing nickname Skins at one stage in your life. Maybe we'll talk about that. Yes. So with your names, but also, Kit, with your heritage, born in Birmingham to an Irish mother and a Caribbean father, you have a number of identities. When you think about it from a crisis perspective, has that been a comfort, or has that added another layer of difficulty for you?
I wouldn't say it's added a layer of difficulty. I didn't realise how much code switching goes on when you're mixed race. So if I was with I had two grandmothers. I had Irish grandmother, who we called Nana, and I had a Caribbean grandmother who I called Black Nana. That was just a normal thing to us. And depending on who you were talking to, mother or father, white grandmother, black grandmother, white grandfather, we had a different vocabulary. We had a different way of behaving. We used to behave differently. And similarly at school, I had a language for school, which was a very, very good, very academic grammar school. I had a language if I was being Irish. I had a language if I was being Caribbean. And I had another language, which was what we spoke at home, which was a hybrid of all of them. And I didn't know that was unusual. I thought everybody did that. When I got to 14, we had the Birmingham pub bombings, and it became very bad to be Irish. And I wouldn't say I disguised being Irish, but I didn't go around telling a lot of people I was an Irish child. And of course, because I'm black or look black, nobody assumed I was Irish. I didn't like that. I didn't like it in myself that I kept being Irish quiet to get through. Then, of course, it has never been too popular to be black. I wouldn't say we live in a racist society, but we live in a society where certainly if you're black, you will have some kind of racism in your life. And that's never been a crisis for me, but it's certainly been something I've had to come to terms with and something I've absorbed and had to find a place for in my life. I've had to stop being angry about it. Very occasionally I still get angry, but I remember spending a lot...
What sort of triggers the anger now?
What triggers it now? I'll give you an example, and it's really ridiculous. I was at this event, let's say, and a woman, she was speaking to the group, and she said to me, "What language do you speak?" And I said, I speak English. And she said, "But why are you here?" And I thought she meant at the event. So I said, I was invited with my friend over there. And she said, "No, I meant in England. Why are you here?" I said, I was born here. She said, "Yes, but were you?" That happened last year.
Last year?
That was last year. Now, it was a very old lady, and it was a very white organisation in a very white town. I don't think she comes across a lot of black people. And I was not rude to her in any way, and everyone was embarrassed, and we got through the sort of awkwardness. That makes me angry because I can deal with it. I'm 64, I've had it all my life, I don't really care. What else is going on? And if that's happening to me, who can bear it, what's happening to other people? And how else is it manifest? This little old lady didn't have much power. She couldn't hurt me. Didn't really matter under the circumstances. But if that's coming out in those circumstances, what else is going on? And I also despair that we haven't got better. I despair that we still have this happening. In my memoir, I talk about certain things that happened to me when I was a little girl, where I would get called certain names, and teachers would be quite racist to me. As I say, I went to a very academic and very white, very, very white grammar school. And the assumption was I'd somehow shouldn't be there. You're not, why are you here? Sort of, are you really clever? The assumption was my friends were clever, but I wasn't. And that was 1971. And we're now in 2025. And are we really still going through those motions of having, as black people, to demonstrate that we're worth something? Are we still having to go through an explanation of why we are here? And obviously, I've got all my answers. I could talk about the Commonwealth. I could talk about transatlantic slavery. I'm tired. I don't want to. I think one of the things that goes on so often is that when you're black, you're asked to have the answers about racism. But that's like asking somebody to explain someone else's problem. It's actually not my problem to deal with racism. It's someone else's problem to deal with racism. I should be benefiting from your anti-racist stance, not taking my time, energy and resilience to educate you. That's your job.
Your memoir,
yes,
and it does give a very vivid sense of what it was to be kind of growing up in Birmingham at that time,
yes,
in quite a divisive city, in quite a divisive country at that time,
yes,
more now than, well, perhaps you're saying actually things haven't changed enough, but
yes,
you'd agree perhaps more divisive perhaps than it is.
Definitely, yes.
And yet your memoir, there's not a lot of anger.
No.
And
no.
there's hardly a touch of bitterness.
No.
And what you've just described is not bitterness. It should
No,
not be characterised as bitterness.
No.
It's legitimate anger.
Yes.
And
yes.
disappointment as well. You
Yes,
can sort of feel, you can feel in
definitely.
your voice.
Yes.
But the memoir,
No.
you're not angry.
No. I'm not at all. You know, we laughed, you know, me and my brothers and sisters, you know, and most people will say or understand that you can laugh through adversity and it's not funny. You know, you're laughing, but it's not ha-ha. We laughed ha-ha at what we were going through. We laughed about being hungry and poor and having two very difficult parents. So there was difficult times, but we would laugh at my parents, it's fair to say, not with them. And we had some very good times in amongst those difficulties.
It strikes me that you... I don't know whether this is the sort of Irish part of your heritage, but you seem to have very much adopted the sort of Van Morrison approach to life. I'm not sure he adopted it personally, but certainly when he's saying it. But you keep yourself on the bright side of the road, right?
Yes.
That shines through in the book.
Yes.
You don't gloss over it, but
No.
you do not dwell in the darkness.
No, and I think...
Is that how you feel, or is that how you've coped? And so when you're writing the memoir...
I think it's a bit of both, because there's 5 of us, 5 brothers and sisters. And one of the reasons that we have all weathered our difficult childhood is because we talk about it endlessly. So there's not much distance between us. You know, like if there's 5 children normally in a family, you will have one that say, that didn't happen like that, or they weren't like that, or you're like this. We don't have that. And I think it's because we regurgitate the pain and we will laugh about it, or we will explain it to one another. Mum was like that because of that. Oh, I didn't know that because I was too young or whatever. So I think part of our coping mechanisms is to talk about it all the time. I was with my brother yesterday and we talked about my father's love of good suits, and we were poor and he used to spend most of our food money on looking good. And we laughed about it and we raged about it. And also, one of the things that we've all been able to do is see our very, very difficult parents as young people. My mum was 32 and she had 5 kids. My dad was 35, he had 5 kids. He didn't want 1 and he had 5. And I just think, God, I can just about cope with my beautiful, well-behaved 2, let alone 5 very cheeky, very intelligent, more intelligent than they were, children on no money, and both 2 immigrants who didn't really know how to navigate life in the UK. So they were at massive disadvantage. Then they have these 5 children. They've got no money. What money they have is misspent. We're all cheeky. We're all very clever, and we're laughing at them, and they know it. And, you know, I just think, what a shame. What a shame for them. No wonder they found it so hard.
Let's just paint a little bit more of a picture, if that's okay, because you've described it as a household of opposites and extremes.
Yes. And
you've described your parents as living sort of entirely separate lives in front of you. Just tell us a little bit about them and their backgrounds, how they come to be together.
Yes. So my mother's Irish, she's from Wexford, and my father's from St Kitts in the Caribbean, and they met on the buses. He was a bus driver. She was what's called a clippy in those days, because you had one of these machines that you click through the tickets. And she loved him. I mean, she adored him. Very handsome, 6'4", very dapper, loved himself. And very beautiful. My mother thought it was Harry Belafonte or, Sidney Poitier at the time. And my mother was 5'2", not a looker, but, attractive enough. But my dad was, had the pick. And he noticed her one day, which he would later on say was his downfall. But he noticed her, and possibly she was pregnant in about 3 months. And this is the days of no blacks, no dogs, no Irish. So there was nowhere for them to live. So they lived in one room in a very miserable part of Birmingham. My dad was very ambitious, so they moved very quickly to a middle-class area of Birmingham. But they were the most unsuited pair in every way. 6'4" black, 5'2" white. My mother was very romantic, and she wanted desperately for him to love her. That would have been her salvation, certainly from her mental illness. And my father was just treading water, waiting to go back to the West Indies. He came for 2 years. In his mind, I come for 2 years, I'll make some money, I'll get some nice suits, I'll go home, conquering hero. He comes over, within a year he's met an Irish Catholic who doesn't believe in birth control, and it's let's have kids from my mum's point of view. So he's like, oh my God, never thought about not having sex, but he certainly didn't want the children. And there you go, you've got these two wedded together, in every single way unsuited, but they've both decided to stay together. My mother would never have got divorced anyway. And I think my father was just waiting to go home. For his whole life, he was waiting to go back to the West Indies.
And he did at one point, but
he went home for a holiday, and hated it, because in the intervening 25 years, he had actually become Victor Meldrew, and he was miserable. It was too hot, food was too spicy, cricket wasn't good on the telly, and so he came back thinking, I've spent my life waiting to go home. I'm now, Eric Morecambe, and I'm English, and I belong in England, but I've put no roots down. He put no roots down with us. He put no roots down with my mum. But he had become English against all the odds. He didn't belong in the West Indies. He never felt he belonged in England. And I can honestly say it was the death of him. He declined when he came home. He never, ever was the same, because his dream had been ruined by the reality. All his friends were in England, for a start. What was he doing in the West Indies? So he was a very deflated man when he came home.
Can we talk about your mum some more?
Yes.
As you say, the bus conductor who fell in love with the driver, the mum of 5 with an incredible work ethic.
Yes.
And a sort of instinctive carer.
Yes.
People off the street that she would see struggling, a pregnant girl sitting in a bus stop, or the tramp standing on the side of the street, all pulled into your kitchen.
Yes.
And she was the one as well, struggling to put food on the table for all of you. She was the one sort of driving that mission. And of course the Irish Catholic who becomes a
Jehovah's
Witness. But underneath all that, you've now come to realise that she was properly struggling with mental illness. Well, how would you sort of characterise that now from this distance?
I would say probably, and obviously I'm not a psychiatrist or any health professional at all, but I think she was probably bipolar. She had moments of intense joy and extreme activity. She would make these meals that would feed 25, but she'd make them sort of once a month, and the rest of the time we didn't eat meals at all. We snacked. And she would lavish us with attention and love and extreme buying of toys, and then there was nothing. All that would be withdrawn, and she would have deep depressions. Her way of coping with her upset at my father not loving her, at our poverty, and her just struggling to bring up 5 children, was that she used to smash milk bottles, and she would load a plastic laundry basket with milk bottles, and the the stack of milk bottles would grow and grow and grow till it reached the top of the basket. She would drag the basket outside to our backyard, which was made of concrete, and she'd smash them one by one. And you could almost see the stress in her deflate and deflate and deflate as she, and you could feel a sort of, I can release now. And that was her coping mechanism, this very bizarre thing. We thought it was normal, by the way. We thought everyone smashed milk bottles as an outlet. It's only sort of when you get to about 15, you think, maybe that's a strange thing. But that was her way of coping. And she, like I say, she used to have these terrible depressions. She cried. I've never known a woman cry on a tap, like she could cry like she breathed. And I don't mean just the odd tear. She would be forlorn. She would be in distress. And it would come and go. It would come in an instant, and then the tears would be dried in an instant, and she'd be laughing about something. And it was a long time before I would ever characterise that as a mental illness. I just thought, this is my bizarre mother. It was more than bizarre. It was something she probably needed medication for.
And her decision to step towards becoming a Jehovah's Witness, you think, was an attempt to kind of fill the undefined gap in her life?
Yes. She wanted to be loved unconditionally. She was never going to get that from my dad, but she would get it from God, she thought.
What impact did your mother's faith? Because as a child, you and your siblings were all drawn into it as well. Not your dad, I don't think.
Not my dad.
He resisted, but the rest of you as a family were living the lives of a Jehovah's Witness. No celebration, no birthdays, no Christmas. You describe it as being a sort of joyless life.
Yes.
But more seriously, this kind of clock that's ticking towards Armageddon, the predicted end of the world in 1975. I mean, on one level, you can you're sitting now even with a sort of faint smile on your face, but as a child, that's utterly terrifying. That's like the worst disaster movie is your reality.
Yes.
I mean, what impact did that have on you?
It was the most damaging thing, I think, of not the poverty, not the crazy mom, not the all the things that happened, not the racism. That was the most damaging thing that ever happened to me. The idea that, because obviously Jehovah's Witnesses believed end was going to come in 1975, and if you were bad, you would die at Armageddon. Well, I thought I was bad. I had a fag at 10. I fancied boys. I stole 10p off my mom out of my mom's purse. I was all those bad things. I had bad thoughts, I thought. Obviously, they were just childish thoughts and childish behaviour, but according to the letter of the law of Jehovah's Witnesses, and there are many of those, I was bad. So when they were saying bad people would die in 1975, that included me. And I lived my life waiting for the angel of death to notice me and come for me at Armageddon. I believed it 100%. I believed it after I'd stopped being a Jehovah's Witness. I probably believed it till I was in my mid-20s. I would have said I didn't, but I can remember, you'd hear in the Bible it says there'll be earthquakes and there'll be plagues and there'll be things one after another, and then the end will come. And it's a chapter in Revelation. And sometimes there'd be an earthquake in China. I was 19, I think. Was this the beginning of Armageddon? Now, that was coming unbidden from the brainwashing that had gone on. Of course, intellectually and on one level, I think, don't be ridiculous. But deep down, my conditioning tells me earthquake, that's Armageddon. Plague and pestilence, that's Armageddon. And so I grew up thinking I would never get old. I would never have children. I would never get a job. I would never go to college. I would never have all these expected life events that most people have. To find myself 64 is a miracle of my life, of my thinking.
It's that thought is still inside you.
It's still. I never, ever, ever expected to get old. I find it amazing that I'm old and the end hasn't come.
It's astonishing, this. So it's like your entire life, actually, the backdrop has been crisis. Or a coming crisis.
A coming crisis. Something's
so even when
you
reached the end of 1975...
Oh, no, it was just late. It was just late.
It was just late. And you're of an age then where you sort of reset yourself and recalibrated that way as well, which is essentially what...
Okay, it hasn't happened in 75, so perhaps Jehovah's Witnesses were wrong about the date, not about the event.
Yes.
The event will happen.
Yes.
So it's 76, okay, it's a bit late. 77, it's a bit late. 78, quite late. So my mother...
It's tapered, but it's still with you.
It's still with me. And my mother died 5 years ago as a Jehovah's Witness, and it was still late. She died in 2018. It was just late. From 1975 to 2018, she was still saying it was late.
Were you ever able to have the conversation with her?
No. I know what you're going to say. No. If you went near that conversation with my mother, like, Mom, are you joking? It's beyond late now. Do you think you could possibly be wrong? She would have thrown herself onto the bed and wailed. And it was not worth the distress it would have caused her to confront her with the obvious truth that it is not going to happen. So we were always, all of us, very, very respectful of her beliefs. And she used to try and preach to us still, and we would very respectfully change the conversation because it is her belief. And I do believe everyone has the right to their beliefs, even if I think they're ridiculous.
So the way you are such a brilliant storyteller, and the sort of duality of the that we all have and hold in us is a theme, I think, in a lot of what you write. Certainly the way you characterise, and it seems like you made that decision about your mum. You can see her, all bits of her.
Yes.
And the fact that one bit of that,
yes,
is anchored in, let's just say, something that is perhaps not fully tethered to reality.
Yes.
That's okay.
Yes, it is.
There are other parts.
I think, yes, and I think seeing people in the round is, for me, what life is about. I used to work in criminal law and met some very dangerous men, mostly men, but some women as well. And those very dangerous, very bad men loved their mom, looked after their neighbours, loved their children, bought things for their children, would be kind to strangers, were polite to me. Bad people can do good things, and very good people can do bad things. And I think, not that you would ever condone the badness. You can see the badness, you can say that's wrong, you can condemn the badness.
And punish the badness.
And some people absolutely deserve to be in prison and should be in prison and should pay for what they've done. And then there's the human side where that person also should eat and not be tortured and not be punished again and again and again for the same thing. So I think I would like people to see me in the round. I would like to not be condemned for some of the things I've done or said when I was 15 or 20 or 25. And I think we all deserve to be seen as a fully human person with terrible flaws and beautiful goodnesses.
Wonderful. You left home at 16. Give us a sense of your sort of state of mind then, Kit.
Oh, well, when I left home, so it's 1976 and Armageddon's late. And I do believe I'm going to die when Armageddon comes, and obviously it's on its way. So I left home thinking, right, you're going to die anyway, so what bad things can you do? What shall I try before I die? Because if I'm going to die for having a fag...
You might as well fill your boots.
I might as well fill my boots and have a couple of spliffs or more and some tablets. And I wonder what that does and how does that feel? So it would be fair to say I had 5 years of sex, drugs and rock and roll, and it was absolutely great. And all the time I'm thinking, OK, Armageddon hasn't come. What else can I do? Armageddon hasn't come. What else I can do? And by now I'm drinking, I'm taking drugs, I'm partying like mad and enjoying it, but overdoing it. And I was overdoing it because I thought I was cramming it in because it was going to end soon. There was no brakes on me. I used to go to my friend's house and we'd sort of roll a spliff. And as soon as that spliff's rolled, I'm rolling another one. And I was known for excessive smoking.
This is where your other nickname came from.
Yes, Skins. So I did roll the best spliffs in the world, I have to say. I was known for them. And I loved it, but I was overdoing it. This wasn't a weekend spliff. This wasn't a weekend tablet. This was like, come on. And of course, inevitably, that catches up with you. And I had some very, very tricky times, some very bad mental crises.
Yeah, you say that you lost your mind.
Yes, yeah.
Just bring that to life for us. How did that manifest itself?
By now, I mean, I'm probably 7 stone. I'm really thin. I'm not eating because I'm just taking drugs most of the time, staying up. I've never slept well. And by now, my insomnia is in overdrive. And the only way I can get to sleep is to be stoned. I had a couple of friends who committed suicide. I had some very good friends who had lost their minds, been sectioned. And I I saw my horizon, and that was where I was going, and I knew it. I was going to have this crisis. I was having a crisis. And one day in particular, I felt as close to madness as I would ever want to feel. I'm living in I wouldn't say it was a squat, it wasn't much better than a squat, but I was living in horrible circumstances. I'm a mess. I'm an absolute mess. I left home at 16 and my mother was extremely disappointed with my choice of life or non-life. But where do I want to go when I'm in that crisis? And it was a proper crisis where I thought, okay, you're mad. You're officially, and I remember having these thoughts, you are officially balmy. You need to be looked after. What are you going to do? And I was living on one side of Birmingham, and my mother, I knew she worked nights at a maternity ward on the other side of the city, and I walked from, probably 8 or 9 miles, probably 2 o'clock in the morning, crying, walking the streets for my mom. That's what I wanted. This woman who I had made fun of all my life, who I thought she's not stable, who had not fed us, she was just a difficult woman. That's who I want. In that moment of crisis, I want my mom. And I went to see her, and I go onto the maternity ward and I find her, and I burst into tears and throw my arms around her, and I said, Mom, I've gone mad. I said, no, you haven't. No, you haven't. Come and sit down. And she made me a cup of tea, and she said, no, what's gone wrong? I said, Mom, I'm mad. I know I'm mad. She said, you're not mad. She goes off, does a bit of work. She comes back, she gets released early from work because of me. And she took me home and she nursed me back to health. She had no training. She had no wisdom. She was not an educated woman by any stretch of the imagination. Her, most senior job was a nursing auxiliary in a hospital. And yet she knew that in that moment, what I needed was love, care, food, calmness. I couldn't sleep. She would sit with me. She would talk nonsense as well. That was really clever of her. She knew that because my head had gone and I was up, I was just, my mind was free-flowing in the universe. And she started telling me about a little baby that was born. Oh, and it had black hair and it did this and it was 7. And I was listening to her and having a break from my own internal nonsense and nightmares. And she talked me back to mental health. She never condemned me. She never said, no wonder you've gone mad, you've been overdoing it. My father, who had no vocabulary for emotions whatsoever, his answer to me coming home in a state was to make me food and put food on the table and say, you need to have some porridge. And it's his way of saying, I love you, I will look after you, I'm here. And between the two of them, these two uneducated, really quite baffled people showed me love and compassion in my moment of crisis with no condemnation, with no questions asked, with no, you deserve it, which I did, with no, I hope now you've learnt your lesson. That was never said to me. It was pure love and compassion, and something I will be eternally grateful for. It could have been very different. My mother could have said, you haven't followed Jehovah's ways, you're not coming home. My father could have said that there's no room for you and I don't want a junkie living in my house. But no, both of them, yeah, you're ours, come home. A lot of people don't have that.
There's a couple of things there that I'm interested in. One is I'm hesitating because I think I'm about to use the word resilience. But what is it in you that led you to recognise that what sounds like a psychosis was underway?
Yes.
Drug induced by the strong chance.
Definitely.
There's something in you at that age that says, no, I've got to sort this out.
Yes.
I've got to stop this. The ability to see, actually, I know where I'm heading here and I've got to change direction.
Yes.
That's a resilience, isn't it?
Yes.
That gets close to a definition of resilience. So where does that come from? When you look at your upbringing, and, again, a question we ask a lot on this podcast, do you attribute that to biography and biology, bit of both, or one or the other? Where are you on where that thought had come from?
I can only say I was frightened out of my wits. I think catching it early, which I did, I didn't. I should have caught it like 6 months before, but caught it just before it really kicked in. I wasn't sectioned or anything.
Seeing others and the
seeing
consequence.
others, and I was frightened out of my wits. I would have epitomised what was happening to me as intense trauma and fear. I was really scared. Maybe my resilience came from recognising that, knowing I had somewhere to go. In that moment of fear, if I thought I can't go home and there's nowhere for me to go, maybe I'd have just had another tablet, another spliff. Maybe I'd have just thought, well, what am I going to do? I knew I had somewhere to go. And I think maybe that's down to biography. My parents had never condemned me. I knew I had 4 brothers and sisters. I could have gone to any of them and said, I've got this problem. And they would have said, come in, you belong with me. And part of resilience, I think, is maybe knowing there's a route out. You can afford to have this desire to get better or this place to go. My resilience is going to be tapping into forms of support. Recognising where I was, I think, is a fluke. I don't believe. I think I'm just very lucky. Very, very lucky.
So interesting. So you're living your life at that stage and before, and this is also, never mind the drugs, a driver of your state of mind.
Yes.
This kind of, roof of ultimate judgment that you're living under.
Yes.
Right? I'm going to die because of my behaviour. And then you come to the realisation that the direction of your life is only going to end badly for you. And I think what you're saying is that what got you through was knowing that you could go back under that roof.
Yes.
Where actually you weren't going to be judged.
Yes.
Your mum, for all of her sort of belief system, was not a judgmental person.
Absolutely. What she did, and again, it's a tribute to her. So she's a very, very uneducated. She was not a bright woman, very uneducated, Irish immigrant, one of 9, brought up herself in poverty. Every day, when all I can remember of my childhood is my mother saying to me, God, you're beautiful. Oh, you're so clever. You're all so clever. You're all so beautiful. This is in the days of intense racism against black people. She had no equipment for anti-racist strategies. This was an innate thing in her that said to her, my children are going to grow up black and Irish. I need to give them something. Now, she may not have had that thought in those words, but she knew that we would need to go through life as a resilient person and to cope with what was coming. We needed to have some inner sense of confidence and inner sense of loving ourselves. And she gave us that every day. Yeah. And so I knew she loved me. And I knew I could go and find her in that maternity ward on this miserable day. Yeah. And she was not going to say, off you go. She was going to go, you're mine. We're going to sort this. And I knew it.
So there's a lesson for those listening. Whatever door they're walking towards or walking through into difficulty or crisis, that judgment bit.
Yes.
Right. If you're in, the sort of orbit of someone who is in difficulty.
Yes.
The ability to help without judging.
Yes.
It's just it's golden, isn't it?
Yes, I think so. And meeting people where they are, rather than where you would like them to be. I was certainly not in a place my mother wanted me to be. But she saw me where I was. And no doubt she would have loved me to have become a Jehovah's Witness again. No doubt she would have loved me to have been different. But she just saw me where I was. And she said, we'll deal with that thing. We won't deal with what I'd like you to be and where I'd like you to be. But I will come and I'll travel all that way. And I'll find you where you are. And I will help you where you are, no matter what happens afterwards.
I mean, the fact that you didn't then immediately, having accepted that help, having kind of begun your recovery, the fact that you didn't then jump 2 feet into her faith.
Yeah.
Could have been very, a lot of people would have thought that would be the natural thing to do, right?
Yes.
You've saved me, so I'm now, I'm all in.
Yes, no.
But you didn't. Yet more demonstration of resilience. I hesitate to say it, and I'm not going to ask you to respond. We're shooting forward a little bit here, Kit, but, it is a handbrake turn in your life. You begin a career in law. How were you able to, again, I'm looking for a sort of practical lesson for others here, I think, having begun to emerge from your crisis, and I'm sure it wasn't easy, and I'm sure it was gradual. But how did you switch mindset? Because it's a dramatic switch of mindset. How did you do that?
Fear. Fear was my main driver. I decided, I knew what had got me into the state I was. So I thought, overnight, stop drinking, stop taking drugs. There was no sort of let's wean yourself off. It was like, bam, I'm not going back there. And I knew I had to get a job. And I just thought, clean up is what I thought. Whatever the straight person's answer to the world is, I will do that. I will get a job. I will get a flat. I will behave myself. I will not drink. I will not take drugs. Fear. Fear was my main motivator to getting a life, getting myself together. I didn't dare go near sex, drugs and rock and roll. That was like, whoa, no. So that was my motivator. And of course it stopped being a motivator after I'd got a handle on my life. But it was definitely fear that stopped me. I wouldn't say misbehaving. It wasn't misbehaving. It was an answer to the fear of dying. So I just stopped doing the things that I believed had led me into a mental health crisis.
That's incredible strength of mind.
Yeah. But fear is a really good motivator, I think. Not when used for good. Many people today would say, I fear debt, so I'm going to save. I fear loneliness, so I'm going to try and find a life partner, or whatever it is. Fear is not necessarily a bad motivator to do things, but it's a bad motivator to stay where you are. It's not to turn your life around. I don't see fear as a bad thing, because it's something you say, I don't want that. But very often it's not enough to keep you somewhere. You have to then begin to love where you are and go towards something rather than running away from something.
So you're a legal secretary. Tell us how you then came to work in and around social services and in sort of adoption specifically.
Yes. I was working in criminal law, and I moved to work I did actually a research project for children in need, looking at mixed race children who were brought up in white environments and how that impacted on them. And inevitably, I ended up working with children in the care system and foster carers. And a lot of people, when you work in criminal law, lose their children to the foster care system if they go into prison or they have problems in their lives. So I knew a lot about the care system. And I adopted 2 children. I sat on the adoption panel, which is the panel that decides who gets to adopt children and which children should go to which families. And I loved it. It was really, really, I mean, it was lovely. It was not great seeing people in crises every day. But I think I did see there, but for the grace of God, go I. You know, my life could have been very different had my parents, with all their faults, not stayed together, or if my mother had one of these mental health crises and we'd have gone into the care system. And I really saw, I think, how them staying together through thick and thin, and even though they weren't suited, had kept my family together. And I certainly knew I could have had a very different outcome.
I'm in danger of oversimplifying, but it seems that you took, again, your ability to sort of see the whole picture and focus on the positive. But it seems that you decided to, you know, focus in on that part of your life that you've described so eloquently, where amongst a lot of madness, you know, in your family, in your upbringing, you focus on, no, actually, what I got is exactly what I needed from my mother. I was cared for at the right moment. You seem to have lifted that bit out and decided, right, how can I put that to work?
Yes. Yes.
You're putting your crisis to work as a theme, right, which is beginning to emerge.
Yes, I think so.
But is that what then led you to say, right, and now not only do I need to work in this area, I also need to make this a fundamental part of my life. I'm going to adopt 2 children.
I mean, I'd like to say that I was that nice about it, but I wasn't. I never adopted my children as anything other than I want to be a parent. This was a selfish act, if you see what I mean. I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm so nice, let me take 2 poor little children out of the care system. No. I knew I couldn't have children. I wanted to be a parent. There's loads of children in the care system. It was a no-brainer. When I found out I couldn't have children and I was offered IVF, I was like, no way. No way. I know where there's children. I know how to be a parent. And IVF was not something I ever wanted to do. So my adopting my children, like I say, it was pure selfishness. I have got love to give. It wasn't, you know, oh, let me make their terrible lives better. It was, how can those children, how can I find a vehicle to love someone, to give this affection to them? And it is my utter privilege to have those children in my life. It's not the other way around. I'm so grateful to them. If the idea that my children would ever be grateful to me for adopting them, I really don't like that.
Yeah, no, I round of applause is not what we're looking towards here. But what I will change that a little bit, if I may. And no one would ever characterise, you know, the pursuit of having your own child through IVF as a selfish act.
No.
There's nothing that's selfish about it. But making the instant decision, I can't have children, which is a traumatic thing to discover, but to so quickly switch to someone I'm going to adopt.
Yes.
I think you're being a little ungenerous on yourself.
It didn't feel like that. To me, it was just, let's go. It was, I had a moment of realisation and perhaps not long enough grief process in recognising that I couldn't have my own children. But it was just like, I know where there's kids. It was like, there's the sweetie shop. Let's go. And I adopted Bethany when she was 2.5, and then 4 years later adopted Luke, who was 1. And my God, the joy and the privilege of those kids, they're so great. My kids are great. I used to teach, I used to speak to adoptive parents about what it was like to adopt. And I used to say, this is how you have to think about adoption. So you walk past the school playground and there's loads of children playing in the playground. And when you see your children playing in the playground, you have to think, they're the best kids there. And if you don't think that, don't adopt. You should not, there's no sense of second best. There's no sense that they're not mine. In fact, I'll give you an example of that. My son is a great sportsman, and he was really, really good at cricket. And so I'm standing with the sports teacher watching my son batting, and my dad was really good at cricket. So the teacher says, "Oh my goodness, Luke, he's a proper batsman." And I said, "Yeah, well, you know what, my dad was really good at cricket, so I'm not surprised." And then about an hour later, I thought, what has my dad got to do with Luke? He never met him. They share no genes. He has inherited nothing from my father. But so embedded is that child in my psyche of being mine that I thought somehow my dad's genes had gone into Luke's hand so that he could hit the ball. That's not to say that Luke doesn't know he's adopted. He does. He knows his history. I used to write, I don't do it anymore because he's 24, but I used to write every year a letter to his birth mother and say, "Here's Luke, here's a photograph of him." I've never met her, but it goes to this, what's it called, letterbox thing where she could go and collect the letters if she wanted to, just to acknowledge that she had a child that she lost, and I have the privilege of that child in my life, and some respect is due to her. And so I sent a letter to her every year. So I know he's biologically not mine. In every other way that is possible, he is mine. And as I say, one of the privileges of my life to know those two children.
And they're both old enough now to appreciate what a force of nature their mother is.
Yes, I think so.
We were lucky to have Lem Cisse on the pod before to talk about his own, very difficult experience within the foster care system. In particular, when it begins with his mother being pressured to put him up for adoption, which tells its own story about, the systems that we had in this country at that stage. You've worked, within foster care and adoption, must have come across sort of countless stories like Lem's. Each one must have an impact on you, I imagine. How have you sort of managed the sort of professional trauma, if you like, of being so involved in that work?
I try my best to talk about it as often as I can. So I talk about the failings of the care system, as well as the many good people that work within it, but the failings of the care system. Children in the care system have less money spent on them than prisoners. They are, in this country, every local authority is the corporate parent of every child in care. So the local authority should act like the parent of those children. The local authority does not act like the parent of those children. They don't care for them enough. They don't care for them in the right way. They don't care. Care is a word that is a very active, emotive word. Looking after someone and making sure they have clothes and food is not care. That's a very arm's length activity. Care goes into deep affection, knowledge, wondering about that child when you're not with that child. And that's what they don't do. So I try my best to talk about the failings and the way that those children deserve better. And that's my response to it, to say those children deserve better.
And when they come of age,
yes.
To say it's goodbye, it's a little bit of an overstatement, but actually in some ways it's not.
It's absolutely what happens.
Once you're out of the system, you are out of the system. And there are people within that system who do their best. Lem's a very good example of how I think he's built around Christmas. Actually, he's built an amazing initiative
thing
that is all about trying to keep a bit of a bridge for those people who
completely
are finding themselves in the early years of being outside of the care system.
We spoke before about one of the ways I was able to recover from my mental health crisis is I went home to my mum and dad. Well, if you have no home to go to when you're having your mental health crisis, you are more than likely going to fall further. It'd be unlikely that you're going to pull yourself out with no help. I knew I had a home, I had two parents, and I was in touch with 4 brothers and sisters, all of whom would have helped me, did help me. And for so many people in the care system, you've got to this age, you've made a mistake, you're falling through the cracks. Well, you are going to fall because there's no one there to help you.
Kit, let's move to when you're in your early 40s. You've been working within law, around adoption, all the things that we've been discussing for over a decade, and then you decide to start writing. You've been writing though. I mean, I think your first published work actually was a manual for adoption and fostering. Am I right?
Yes.
But what was the catalyst?
I'd adopted Luke, who was not a well child, and I'd given up work for the first time since I'd started work when I was 20. And I was a great reader.
Quite late in life, you were a great reader.
Very late. I think in my early 20s, I found books as a way of coping with my fractured mental health. And I just thought, I've read loads of books, great reader. I'll write a book, it'll be really easy. It'll be a bestseller. It will be in Waterstones in about 6 weeks' time, and that's the way it's going to happen.
Hang on. So you're a we had Paul McKenna on the podcast not long ago, whose new book is all about manifesting.
Yes.
So you manifested all this.
Well, I was a fool, basically. I was an idiot. I had an ego.
Well, you weren't a fool because you're completely... happened.
I never...
You imagined your book on sale in Waterstones.
Yeah, but that was my first book that I imagined on sale in Waterstones. And my first book was absolutely atrocious. And I could not believe that I couldn't do it. I was like, hang on a minute. I've read all these books. I'm really good at English. I can spell. How can I not write a bestseller? And believe me, my first 2 novels were not bestsellers. They were not fit for consumption. I'm glad no one's ever read them. No one ever will read them. And so from sort of mid-40s to mid-50s, when I did have a bestseller, that was a period of get real, do the work, learn the craft, fail again, fail better, pick yourself up and keep going. I had no respect for the craft of writing, and I had to learn that respect the hard way. And I wrote My Name is Leon in an attitude of the utmost humility. I thought, no one's going to read this book. No one's read the previous 2. No one will read this one. It's a book about a little 9-year-old boy in the care system. People don't care about boys in the care system. Why is anyone going to read this book? But I loved it. And that was important to me. I knew I'd done a good job for those children in the care system, and it was my ode to them. It's what I owed them. So I just thought, I've written this little book, and it was very different to it's going to be in Waterstones and a bestseller. It was more like, my mum will read it, my sister will read it, my friends will read it.
So you'd lowered your expectations.
Massively.
You send it off to an agent.
Yes.
And then, I'm sure all these things didn't happen, immediately. But a bidding war starts.
Yes.
Over the
book.
There is no doubt that what you've done is created something that is wanted.
Yes, and I was baffled when for these auction meetings you go and meet different publishers, and I'd gone from no one wants to read your work to, oh no, we love it, please come to us. And I remember thinking, hang on a minute, what's going on? I've almost felt like there was something going on that I should be aware of, or someone's taking the mickey. And my agent said, no, it's a really good book. And I was like, yeah, but is it? And people were bidding for the book, and the bids were going up and up. And I said to my agent, for God's sake, take the bid before they read it again and realise they don't want it. She would say, no, I think we can do better. And I was going, just accept it, please. I was desperate to be published by that point. And she was great, she was a mover and a shaker. She knew what she was doing. Yeah. And she got a very, very good deal for me. But I would have taken the first one. I'd have bitten their hands off. And she said, no, we're going to keep our powder
dry. So on the day that deal is signed, how did that feel?
Utterly unbelievable and wonderful. But I didn't believe it. I didn't Still didn't believe the hype, still thought, oh, you're going to get found out, you know, someone will read it again and go, I'm going to withdraw that offer. So it was a bit weird. It was a long, long time before I believed it was true. A long time, maybe a year before I just thought, oh.
The moment of seeing that book, holding it in your hands for the first time.
And in Waterstones.
Does that seared in your memory?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I went to Waterstones, my little local Waterstones in Leamington Spa, and it was in the window. And I took a photograph of it, and I thought, that's what I wanted. Actually, what I wanted to be on the 3 for 2 table in Waterstones. That was my absolute joy. And I didn't get to be on the 3 for 2 table for a long time because I was in hardback in the window. They didn't put me on the 3 for 2 table because it was too much of a big book. I am now on the 3 for 2 table occasionally, and it's a joy. I love the 3 for 2 table. It's a milestone in my life.
Amazing. And then comes another one of those moments that I think supports the idea that what you do when you've found a moment to emerge, you dig out that little gem of opportunity from crisis, is you immediately share it. You've been a huge advocate for amplifying, marginalised voices in literature, and you donated part of that advance from My Name is Leon, your first successful book. So this isn't something that you're doing 10 years into your successful writing career. This is something that you do off the bat, to use a cricketing analogy. And you create a scholarship to the MA in Creative Writing course in the Department of English and Humanities at Birbeck.
Yes.
You do it immediately. So what's that all about?
I mean, I don't know. I wanted someone to feel, I think, the joy that I'd had. And I knew that the only reason I had become a good writer is because I'd learnt the craft. I thought I wasn't one of the people, and I'm sure they exist, that just pick up a pen and write a bestseller. I had to learn the craft of writing. I know for people from my background, impoverished, you're not going to have the money to do an MA in creative writing, which was then £9,000 a year. Who's got £9,000 and anyway you're working and anyway, no one from my family goes to university. So I knew all the barriers there are for people to learn the craft of writing, and I really wanted to give someone from my background or any difficult background the chance to go to university without that debt. The opportunity to go and learn the craft to a university I had a great respect for, from someone I knew who taught on that particular course, and also just the joy of learning something you love. When you're a writer and you love the craft and you have this great respect for the craft, being taught well is fabulous, and having the opportunity to be published is fabulous. And I really just wanted someone to feel what I felt, have the joy that I'd had.
Tell us about your new book, Kit. Also a story anchored in empathy, I think.
Yes. It's a story about kindness and the unexpected opportunities that come our way to show kindness. It's about a single parent who has a great tragedy visited on her, and how she emerges from that tragedy, and a relationship that she has with a child that changes her life both for the good and for the bad, and how she navigates that relationship and how she navigates loneliness, and comes to realise that very often the relationships that sustain us aren't blood ties. They are people that come into our lives that change us hugely, but they may not be related to us. They might be what's termed a stranger, and yet they can get straight inside. They can get deep inside, so that they do become friends of the soul.
Kit de Waal, you're amazing. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
If you've been left feeling inspired, please do leave us a review. And if you found this episode useful, we would be delighted if you shared it with your friends and network. You can follow us on Instagram and TikTok. And if you hit subscribe, you'll find a lot more crisis conversations. As always, full transcripts along with helpful links are available on our website. just head to crisiswhatcrisis.com. Thanks also to the Crisis What Crisis team, Jane Sankey, Hannah Walker-Brown and Bill Griffin and the brilliant people at Global. And thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, you see